Hey guys, welcome back to Hotel Dropouts, and today I will be presenting alone as both Bernard and Dan are busy doing something else. Last week we were supposed to record, but I think somebody had a romantic emergency. When will the plight of romanticism stop torturing us poor millennials? That I do not know. What I do know is you can check us out on Spotify and Patreon as well. In fact, you should go on our Patreon, just leave a mean comment, just a sadistic comment, right? Call us out, right? Say something mean about Bernard, because apparently if there are no activities on your Patreon page, they deactivate your account. Okay, in any case, this week I have been dreaming to talk about this topic and I get to do it alone. And this is the topic of that famous 38-year-old Chinese man who is a cross-dresser and managed to bamboozle and have had sex with more than 1,500 men in China, well, in Nanking, China. The locals refer to this event as the Nanking Massacre. Now, let me explain. Chinese characters are, what's the word, homophonic, right? They sound the same. So Nanking could literally refer to South Capital, which is, by literally the word Nanking means South Capital, means the main city down south, whereas Beijing refers to the main capital up north, right? So Nanking is a place, but if you want to stretch it, it could also refer to the male genitalia. So it's a sort of a play on word. This massacre referring to how this 38-year-old man managed to have sex with so many young men. And what's impressive is that a lot of these young men are very good looking. They are influencers themselves. A lot of them are influencers. A lot of them are athletes or fitness coaches and whatnot. And the event took the internet by storm. People first started casting derision, ridicule, just making fun of this 38-year-old man who we will call Hongjie, which is the nickname is given himself. So Hongjie, Hong literally the last name, Jie means sister. So sister Hong, kind of. There's something endearing about that. And so yeah, let's before we jump into the subject though, because I feel like peering beyond the surface, where it is obviously scandalous for a person to do this and to get so much ridicule because he's not particularly good looking, even after the makeup and wig and all the cross dressing. It is still it's still very impressive how he managed this feat, right? So sleeping with more than 1,600, I think, yeah, 1,600 men over a span of, I believe, 2 to 3 years. That's still a lot of men per day. um, so once people, have had their laughs, people started to wonder, how did you manage to do this? Because a lot of these men did find out that he was indeed cross-dressing, that he was not a real woman. Even if they were convinced that this is a real woman, he's still not. I don't want to judge, I don't want to be mean, but it's not the best looking person out there, okay? It's not the most convincing femoid. So people began to wonder, what's the secret? How did you manage to do this? Some of the female response on the internet in China echo sentiments like, "Oh, why do I try so hard with men when they obviously don't care this much about how we look?" Whereas some men share the sentiment of jokingly, they share the sentiment of, "Oh, we've already." If I'm already here, I may as well have sex with you. That kind of sentiment, right? So it's not like, oh, it's not like I'm really attracted to you, but it's hey, you managed to catfish me, you got me here, I may as well get something out of it. In any case, I thought we could talk about another famous crossdresser in China before we jump into this topic. So, again, subscribe and like to the channel if you haven't. Check us out on Spotify or Patreon, and let's begin. Okay, so before we talk about the Nanking Massacre, let's talk about the famous opera singer who was a spy, who was a crossdresser, who managed to bamboozle a French man who worked for the French embassy back in 1960 in Beijing. Okay, so this man's name was Shi Pei Pu. Shi Pei Pu. That's a very tricky word, a very tricky name to pronounce in English. Sounds almost fake. This person was an opera singer from the province of Shandong who later went to Beijing for the art school. That's in 1960. If you want to do anything along the lines of arts, uh, uh, drama, arts, or even some of the most famous martial arts actors. They all go to Beijing. They were trained in Beijing. This includes Jackie Chan. This includes, oh my goodness, I should know their names, but most of the sort of the early 2000s famous Hong Kong stars that do martial arts, they actually all come from sort of a circus school in Beijing. And Chinese circus is truly something else. Anyway, that's a tangent. So Shi Peipu was actually an opera singer who regularly performed, and he met this young French man who was 20 years old at the time, and he was an accountant who worked for the French embassy. Now, the interesting thing is that according to his diary, he had only he had only had sexual relationships with men back in school, and he yearns for having sex with women, I guess. Was that why he went to China? That could be it. I'm not so sure. But the man's name was Bernard Bourrisco. And I think I'm butchering the pronunciation, but it's French. It's spelled as Boursicotte. So since the T is silent, it sounds something like Boursico. Um, that's a mouthful to pronounce, and jokingly enough, it sounds like bussy caught, caught in the bussy, which he was. So, for the purpose of this podcast, I will refer to him as Bernard Bussy Court. Okay, so Shi met Bernard in a local, not tavern, but a show house, sort of a theater. Um, the cool thing was that the Shi was actually sort of he was double cross-dressing. He was a man cross-dressing as a woman, but managed to convince Bernard that he was in fact a woman cross-dressing as a man in order to sort of satisfy her parents' need for a son, you know. And so yeah, this is double cross-dressing. That's kind of insane. A man cross-dressing as a woman who claims to cross-dress as another man. So I guess in this way you could justify some of the more masculine features on your face, right? In any case, upon their meeting, they very quickly had relations. This is to say, important detail to include is that back in the 1960s, sex happened in the dark. So there is an argument to be made that Bernard never really got to see the bussy, and, and since he's had relations with other men. So I would imagine yeah, I would imagine that he had no idea what the female anatomy looked like. So even for him, it was difficult to find out. They didn't have pornography back then. It was very difficult. Okay, cut the man some slack. Okay, in any case, so after their meeting, which was during Christmas, by the way, what's a better time to experiment, huh? They started having relations, they started dating and seeing each other. It's a very long story, but let me cut it short, give you a simplified version. The Shi was eventually recruited by the state and started extracting documents and information from the French embassy. And even when Bernard was sort of posted in remote areas, they were still meeting up, and through some kind of pressure, I'm not too sure, because according to Wikipedia, they wrote the article in a way that it seems to imply that the Chinese government was also getting documents out of him, and not just through not just through the opera singer, but throughout their relationship, Shi had been siphoning information from Bernard Boucicaut, um, and eventually they were able to move to France. And I think the event that prompted this move was because Shi convinced Boucicaut that she was pregnant and have had a child. So there were major breaks between their meetups. At one point, they didn't see each other for, I think, maybe 3 or 4 years. But she came to him with a child that looked mixed race, and convinced him that this is your kid. Okay, you're the baby. You're the baby's father, so you must, take care of it. Back then, I presume this type of honor is very important. Um, Plus, raising a kid back then wasn't that big of a deal, so I guess I guess it was easier to convince a man to take both you and the child. What's fascinating about this was that, you know, for very obvious reasons, she was a Chinese Han, a Chinese man of Han heritage, whereas Bernard Boucicaut looked as French as it could be. So, in order to trick him into believing that this is a kid of mixed race, bearing in mind, like, all this time, Bernard thought, he was in fact a she. Shi had gone to the Xinjiang area and kidnapped. Well, not kidnapped. I think he bought a kid from an Uyghur mother. So the kid is Uyghur, right? And if you've been to the Xinjiang region, if you had a look at Uyghurs, they don't exactly look Han, right? It's a different race of people. But when the kid is still young, it looked like a mixed race baby. It looked half Asian and half European, somewhat, I guess. So the plot was successful. He was successfully bamboozled yet again. They moved back to France, and then were subsequently both arrested. And the interesting thing here is that Shi had apparently been examined by the French authorities, by the French investigators, um, and they found out that Shi had the ability to retract his genitals, sort of suck it up into creating a cavity that resembled a vagina, which is kind of insane. And I have to say, I can back up this claim, because it's right. If you're a millennial Taiwanese kid, you remember the good old days of coming back from school around 6 p.m. You go on these channels and you're waiting for Dragon Ball Z. You're waiting for Inuyasha or Naruto. But the shows that come before that are usually these weird lifestyle shows. And there was this show that talked about esoteric martial arts in I believe it was Tai Chi, and the master had the ability to suck up his testicles and stone and stem. Right, sorry, stone and pillars, as phrased in the Game of Thrones. He was able to suck up the entire genitals into his body, and I saw this man perform live. We didn't, obviously, there was no nudity involved, but you could see sort of through the shape of his trousers that he was able to suck something up, and then to verify the claim, they hit him in the crotch with this semi-hard sponge, sort of like baseball bat. It's kind of like a practice baseball bat. It's not exactly a child's toy. It would hurt seriously if you hit somebody with that. It had a foam, sort of foam lining, kind of. Anyway, so he was hit and he was completely fine. So I knew about this art since a long time ago. It is anatomically possible. Whew, the more you know. So So Shi was discovered to have this ability, which, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that Shi grew up going to French school in even in Beijing, which is why that he was completely fluent in French. Um, yeah, so he was able to tell the French authorities about this. They were arrested around 1983 in Paris, but they were both exonerated, I believe, by the French president of the time, François Mitterrand or something. I'm not very well versed with French history, but back then there were efforts made by the French government to soothe relations with China. So the official the official statement was that, oh, the two countries really should not quarrel over something so stupid, because you can imagine this went national. My goodness, this went viral before viral was a thing. And you can imagine how embarrassed Boucicaut was to to be the most famous bamboozled man in the world. They sort of they kind of had this toxic relationship where they clearly loved each other, but it's still under the guise of espionage. There's that major salt vibes, if you remember that movie from back in the 2000s starring Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, I think. um in any case, the child then had grown up in France along with Bernard Boucicaut, and I believe Bernard had come to acknowledge this kid as his own. His name was Shi Du Du, which is named by Shi Peipu, so by the opera singer. So even though they no longer lived together, they kind of had major falling outs. The Bernard still respected his wishes to keep the child's name. He could have easily changed the name of the child to something else. He was a diplomat after all. He had some governmental affiliations. I don't imagine that it would be difficult to arrange something like that. So, moral of the story is that sometimes sometimes you can't blame the bamboozled. You should look more into why the bamboozler was so successful. This is kind of a crazy story, and this is the story that immediately came to mind when I looked at this incident from Nanking, the Nanking massacre. So let's jump into this story. It is fascinating. The man, as we call Hong Jie, Sister Hong, lives in Liaoning. Well, came from Liaoning, but then settled down in Nanking. So 38 years old, don't really hold an actual job, at least not to my knowledge. He basically sleeps with a lot of young men, film it, and release them across different channels in order to garner views and get ad revenue, I guess. I have no I'm not really sure about the economics behind this, but a lot of people are doing it. Famously, South Korea has this problem with Airbnbs and hotel rooms and motel rooms full of cameras, full of hidden cameras, because they know that the sort of dating culture in South Korea is that you don't really have sex in the house, you go to these motels. So they were counting on you to come to their establishment to have sex, and then they record you, then they sell the footage of you having sex online in order to make up for the for the very cheap room prices. The lengths people would go to combat inflation, huh? So Hongjie had has a very powerful online presence not back then. So once he's garnered all this attention, this ridicule, people are kind of calling him out, making fun of him. He responded to accusations of, oh, how did you must have tricked them, or you must have fed them alcohol, or you must have done some kind of witchcraft to get these men to sleep with you. How did you do it? And he famously replied in a post where he said he provided motherly love. He caused no fuss. He was not fussy. Didn't bring any drama to the lives of these men. He was caring, and he, and I quote, focused on oral uh, fellatio techniques. Okay, he focused on developing his techniques. And overall, he knows his place. He, like I said, no drama. He's very caring. Just the sort of ideal, the sort of ideal woman for a man back in the 80s or 90s. Very old school. And I think people are not very happy with this answer because it's kind of true. He in his through his post, the subtext is that a lot of these men, although having very sort of on the surface, on the surface, they have a very successful life. They stream, they work as an influencer. They have job security in the sense that they all they have to do is do partnerships and sponsorships, and then they make good money, right? They make really good money. But he said that a lot of these men feel like they had to be strong for the world outside. They have to keep up an appearance. But as soon as they go home, they don't feel the warmth from their wives, from their family. They feel like they still had to keep up appearance once they go home. They don't really have people that they can afford to be vulnerable with. This is very tragic. I feel like every straight man in China should afford themselves a gay best friend because you can be vulnerable with us. We're totally there for you. so, with a lack of this avenue for being vulnerable, with a lack of this avenue to channel their feelings, a lot of these men are very drawn to him because he's super low maintenance. This sister Hong basically asks these men to bring fruits or bring vegetable oil. I kid you not, this is what's written on the news article. He would just ask them to bring over some common household items, something that he might need that would save him a trip to the grocery store, and bring this over, we'll smash, right? I had previously thought that the connection that they would have would be very very surface level, very very get to the business, right? Let's do this and then goodbye. But I watched to um against the advice of some other friends I have. I went ahead and watched a few clips. I watched not just clips, sorry, I watched a full episode, and I analyzed very carefully the interaction between them. Uh, and everything's sort of started to make sense because I feel like a lot of these men like they find out mid-sex that they were indeed having sex with another man, that it was not a woman, but they still kind of just kept doing it. They still didn't want, they none of them threw into a feat of violence. None of them, uh, you know, yeah, the common rage that you've come to expect in some other forms of media, um where this kind of stuff happens, in places like Indonesia, or even the West, where cross-dressers have been found out that they bamboozled their client, and then there's violence against them, right? This is a big problem. A lot of transgenders face so much sexual violence that it's truly a big problem, and it's surprising that it didn't happen to Sister Hung. And I think I know why. Throughout the whole incident, some of the recordings are like the full encounter, right? It's not just the act of sex itself. And listening to their conversations, I very soon realized that this Miss Hung is actually a very good guy. So is a very good person. He would ask about, he would genuinely ask about some of the troubles that these people are facing. In one of the clips that I saw, a man was feeling very insecure about his penis size, and had confessed that some of the women in his life had made fun of him because of his the size of his genitals, and the fact that after marriage, when feelings started to wane, that his wife no longer is that interested in having sexual relations with him. right? So very quickly you sort of go into this with an attitude of, oh, I'm looking for something kind of just, it's like watching reality TV. You're looking for something spicy, something kind of funny, something with entertainment value. And I just ended up feeling really bad because these are some very real problems that a lot of men in China face. There, a lot of, especially the younger ones, can deal with, can sort of be victims of insecurity. And imagine that with the gender imbalance in China, the amount of competition you need to face as a straight man. My goodness, I feel like it's almost too much. It's so much pressure. When you get into the dating field, I feel like hooking up is a different thing. Hookup culture in China would be very straightforward. It's you get the business done. But the actual dating culture, where you need to form these deep relationships with women, is incredibly challenging because of the competition, because of the expectation. Your partner may not care about the money you make, may not care about where you come from, but their parents do. And in cases where the woman is very close to their family, even if they disagree with what their parents think, they still have this tendency in their subconscious that, oh, I want to make sure I keep my parents happy. So I'd rather choose a man that ticks the right boxes, that my parents approve of. That even though if I could even if I love somebody, and that person is that person is not very, my parents don't like that person, I would still very likely end things because, part of being a good daughter, part of being a respectful daughter is by respecting the wishes of your parents. It's just a cultural thing, okay? So TLDR, really tough dating world, and all the sort of modern plights and the societal malaise surrounding being a man is doubly or quadruply amplified in China. And suddenly everything starts to make sense. It makes sense that these people would seek Sister Hung out, would sometimes on many occasions, just so that they can have this very kind of real um a real connection where they can be vulnerable. Famously, on one of his posts, he said that he provides motherly love, in the sense that he is all caring. And I think that it is very true. It is very likely that a lot of these men have come to enjoy a momentary respite, a moment where they get to just be vulnerable and be themselves, so that they don't have to act up. And if the price for doing that is to have sex, is to not, why not? In many cases, I don't feel like it's work for the boys. Like it's not something they care too much about. It's nice. It's a nice addition, right? So yeah, that about covers the event, the Nanking massacre event. I feel like as a society, we have a lot to talk about when it comes to the problems that young men are facing. And, we haven't even begun talking about the problems young women are facing nowadays. I feel like people are just so kind of, people are mentally abducted or distracted by problems fabricated by the elite, right? As opposed to worrying about actual housing costs or the declining birth rate or the very real problems of inflation. We're often thrown into being outraged about politics, about immigrants. Or gender politics, or even the Epstein thing, right? In any case, I think it would be very interesting to talk about the problems surrounding young men nowadays with the boys, and that should hopefully happen in the coming months. I have no guarantee. So let me know what you think about the Miss Hung and this crazy man who just, it's still impressive to think about it. Like, How? And I truly feel like as a single gay man, I have no excuse. I have to get myself out there. Oh man, this definitely shook me to the core. Right, guys. So that about covers the episode today. Leave a like if you will. Leave any comments if you have any questions, and I will see you very soon. Goodbye.